Yes, well, thank you, Carrie, for organizing this, and for all of you for attending. Let me get out of there. All right, there we go. So, yes, bridging the gap from books to bench for students with disabilities. And I'm actually very pleased that I get to follow Anne-Marie's presentation, because they have, in some ways, a model program of what it is that we at Purdue are hoping to, or are attempting to develop for students with other disabilities. So here we have the statistics that I'm sure most of you are familiar with related to persons with disability. In the normal workforce, 10% of people report having a disability. In the sciences, it's about 2% of employees that report having disabilities. So there's a disparity there, obviously. Now, here's the interesting statistics, though, if we go to the next slide. So, starting out, you have roughly 18% versus 18% of students starting out with enrolled in life sciences and engineering. Now, but if you look at the next line, by the time you get to grad school, that number has gone down to 6.5% of the average student and 2.1% of students with disabilities. So there's a drop, whereas it's equal roughly going into undergraduate programs. Coming out of undergraduate programs, going on to further education, now there's a one-third difference there. The next numbers are even more kind of startling. There's 28,000 PhDs given. Of those 300, well, that's in sciences and engineering. Of those, 300 are to people with disabilities on an annual basis. So there's a disconnect somewhere along the line. And the funding agencies have been very good on focusing on funding programs to engage students in science degrees, in providing the, coming up with ways of assisting in providing the information, etc. But there's a disconnect between the degrees and the careers. And my opinion, and the opinion of Dr. Duerstock, Bradley Duerstock, who was the one that started the Institute for Accessible Science, is that this largely has to do with the fact that science degrees are primarily book-based, other than the lab courses, which tend to be done with partners, etc., whereas science careers require the person to be able to do hands-on science. And so there has not been as much focus on moving from STEM degrees to STEM careers. And doing that provides a different set of challenges, because now we not only have to look at getting the student to acquire the information necessary, but being able to participate in a hands-on setting in labs. And so the Institute for Accessible Science is a group at Purdue under the Biomedical Engineering Department, which is funded generously by the NIH with a Director's Pathfinder Award. And our goal, moving on to the next slide here.
Each one had 3.
I did what?
You want to add 3.
Oh, I touched the touchpad. Okay. Is it backspace or delete that goes back? Backspace.
There you go.
Okay. All right. So just to make sure, what is the title of that slide?
Access to other accessible labs.
Nope. Need to go back further. I really did a number on it. Okay. Is that Ias core beliefs?
Yep.
Okay. Perfect. The detriment of touchpads. So, essentials for success in inclusion. One, there has to be belief that it's possible and viable. Now, interestingly enough, that's not just from the educational side of things, and that's not just from the parental side of things. This is something that has to also be worked on in the students, providing them with the self-confidence to know that they can in fact succeed, not only getting a science degree, but also getting a science career. Then, of course, the next component is the skill and knowledge base to do all of that. Okay. Then the next thing, of course, is we have to have the assistive technology in order to provide the access to the lab. Now, so the mission of the IAS, of the Institute for Accessible Science, promote the inclusion and active participation of persons with disabilities in biomedical science careers through practical laboratory experiences, assistive technology, AT, development, student and educator support, services, and research. Okay, so just a little bit of background on Dr. Duerstock. He himself is a PhD, has a PhD in neuroscience, and he has a spinal cord injury, so he is a quadriplegic. And so part of this comes out of his desire. You know, a lot of science is done, a lot of advancement is done through selfish endeavor, right? And so both Dr. Duerstock and myself have a vested interest in seeing students with disabilities succeed in science careers, because that is our chosen profession. So part of it is, part of the assistive technology development is to develop assistive technology that is beneficial to us. The other part of it is that, you know, he sees this disconnect. He sees the students getting degrees but not going into careers. So the IAS's three-pronged approach. The first, of course, is assistive technology development to enable students to operate independently in lab settings. The second is practical hands-on training. And the third component is an online community to provide support and questions, etc. So I'm going to address these. So the first thing is the Ias Hub, which is the website that we have developed. Think of it as not quite Facebook, but Facebook on steroids. So the idea is it provides forums for students with disabilities to communicate with each other, for educators and researchers in disabilities to communicate and disseminate information, as well as for parents to have questions answered, etc. On top of that, we have a set of role model videos of persons with disabilities who have successful science careers. Carrie Sapalo happens to be on that list of role model videos. Wow. So if you go to iashub.org, you can view a video of Carrie Sapalo talking about his own success and how he has made it through both college and into a career in science. And one of the things that we found, of course, is that online communities take a while to develop. And one of the downfalls of the funding model is that you have 3 years of funding, and then all of a sudden, now the question becomes sustainability. So I would be happy to speak with anyone afterwards who has ideas on sustainability of programs, because there have been a lot of great programs that have come down through the years that unfortunately wither on the vine once the funding dries up. And so the question is, you know, this is actually this is a side topic, but something that the community of chemists with disabilities really needs to consider and brainstorm about is how can we come up with sustainable methods of disseminating information, of providing access to the tips and tools that are needed for students with disabilities to succeed in STEM careers. The next thing that we do a lot of is assistive technology design. So here we have the Accessible Biomedical Immersion Laboratory. And this is just it was a standard lab space that the Ias came in and modified. So one of the things we did was they adjusted the hood so that a person in a wheelchair could fit underneath the hood comfortably. Same with the sink.
Go back a slide.
Did it skip a slide forward? Okay. All right. Thank you. Adjusted the sink so that likewise a person in a wheelchair could fit comfortably underneath it. The workstation is adjustable in height. We also adapted the safety. One of the things that often doesn't get thought about in labs is the safety equipment. So we adapted the safety shower and the eye wash station so that a person with a wheelchair could easily fit in. The lab is also labeled with Braille, and so it is as accessible as we can make it for a person who has visual impairments. One of the things we've done actually is put audio tags. There's this little device called a pen friend that you can use to audio tag things, and so we've audio tagged all of the lab drawers so that you can come by and touch the pen to the tag and it will tell you exactly what's in that drawer. There are a couple of other devices that you see up there, paper towel dispenser that can be operated by just putting your hands underneath it, so for somebody that has limited mobility. And then one of the things that's there is a pipetting device that's still under development, but we are working to develop an automated pipetting device for someone either with mobility issues or with visual impairment. So that it's, you can imagine pipetting in a 96 well plate can get a little tedious, and so the ability to do that, well, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so, the idea is to be able to create something that is affordable, right? So these things do exist if you spend $100,000 to get a high throughput system. The goal is to bring that down to the level where either, well, certainly at a graduate student level, a university would say, okay, we can afford to purchase something of that type. Moving on then to the next slide, we have, okay. Now we also have, okay, these are some of the assistive technologies that have been developed. So the access scope was the first thing that was developed. And it again is a remotely controlled microscope so that someone in a wheelchair can control it from a computer. It also happens to work very well for somebody with low vision because it's on a computer screen and so is magnified. We have, let's see here. Okay, and then you just have some other examples. So there's a wheelchair there, I believe, that has a camera for some gestures recognition. And then we'll move on to, these are some of the fun, this is the fun things to show. So here's all of our robotics stuff. We're doing work with, Aha, thank you. I am not as good with PowerPoint slides as I ought to be. Honestly, I don't like using them, but there are pictures, so I'll let you guys see them. But with the robotics, one of the things is we're working with the robotic arm to do manipulation of things in a lab setting. And we're working for multimodal control. So whether it be using down there you'll see a 3D joystick called the Falcon that you can use to manipulate it and move it. We also have a graduate student who is currently working on using gesture recognition to control the robotic arm and doing it in such a way that someone who has limited gestures, those gestures can be mapped to the full range of motion of the robotic arm. Okay. Now, the other thing we have, the third prong, is the practical training. And so we have a summer program. It's in conjunction with the Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowships at Purdue. Yes. And so what we do is we bring in students with disabilities, put them in a lab for 8 weeks. we help to provide any accommodations or any accommodations that are necessary. And last year we had one student. She had very low vision, and they were able to, by using contrast dyes for colors, etc., to set it up so that she could independently do Western blotting, another tedious biochemical technique. But she was able successfully to do that on her own, and by the end of the 8 weeks was proficient at it. This year we've expanded, and in fact we will have 6 or 7 students. So that's growing nicely. Now the next slide, the last slide actually, is our virtual reality wet lab. So what we've done is taken the ABLE lab, the Accessible Biomedical Immersion Laboratory, and created an online simulation. So if you go to iashub.org, you can play with this. And one of the things that we've done is we've set up different avatars that you can use. So you can navigate around the lab as someone in a wheelchair, or you can navigate around the lab as somebody who has anywhere from a 5% field of vision to a 20% field of vision, to get an idea. And the hope is that what will happen is people will use this in thinking about designing lab settings. That's the goal, right? Is to use this as a tool for people to come in and say, okay, what would happen for someone in a wheelchair or someone with low vision if the lab were set up in this direction or this setup? And so that's our goal, is that this will actually become a tool that's used by not just us, but by designers as well. So the goal, again, is to introduce students into lab settings, to give them the hands-on techniques and technology necessary to enable them to have a fulfilling career in the STEM field. And so the last slide is just acknowledgments of all of the people on the IAS team. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. Thank you very much.
All right.